Hello and welcome to another intensive care hotline and intensive care at home live stream. Today's topic is ethics committees in intensive care and why they get it wrong most of the time. That's today's topic, and I will break this down for you with some real life experiences with our clients, but also from my time working in intensive care. So welcome again to this live stream. Also want to welcome the viewers that watch this on replay. Given that this is a live stream, please type your questions or comments into the chat pad. Once we've gone through today's topic, I will probably also have some time to read out and answer some questions that came in during the week. We'll probably go for up to an hour, and want to get right into it after a couple of housekeeping issues. So before I get into today's topic, in case you're wondering what makes me qualified in talking about today's topic, I'm a critical care nurse by background. I have worked in intensive care / critical care for over 20 years in 3 different countries. I have worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years. I have been consulting and advocating for families in intensive care all around the world for the last 10 years as part of my intensivecarehotline.com consulting and advocacy service. So go and check out intensivecarehotline.com. I'm also the founder and managing director / CEO of Intensive Care at Home, where we are sending critical care nurses into the home for predominantly long-term intensive care patients that are ventilator dependent with tracheostomy, but we're also providing BiPAP, CPAP, VPAP ventilation at home. We're providing tracheostomy care at home. We're providing home TPN services as well as home infusion services. So that's a little bit about me. With intensive care at home in particular, we are at the moment currently serving all areas in Australia, all major capital cities in Australia, but also regional areas. We are NDIS, an NDIS approved service provider. We are also TAC approved in Victoria, iCare approved in New South Wales, as well as NIISQ in Queensland, as well as we are in a DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs approved service provider. If you are looking for intensive care at home in the US, please contact us as well. We can help you in the US as well. So without further ado, let's get into today's topic: ethics committees in intensive care and why they get it wrong most of the time. The first time I developed insights around ethics committees in intensive care when I worked in a particular ICU, where I realized that patients have NFR / DNR orders without patient or family consent. So to illustrate that with an example, I remember I was looking after a 41-year-old lady with a young family. She had end-stage breast cancer. She was in ICU with a pneumonia. She was on high-flow oxygen, on and off BiPAP, CPAP. And I remember when I started my shift with this lady, looking through the paperwork, I realized that there was an NFR form, i.e. NFR stands for not for resuscitation, i.e. if her heart was to stop, that she would not be resuscitated. And when I looked at the form, I could see that neither the patient nor the family was informed about this quote unquote medical decision. And I challenged, I remember when, the doctors came for their ward rounds, I said to them, I realized there is an NFR form and the patient or the family have not been consulted about this, let alone given consent to this, and they need to give consent to it. So I believe, I put them on the spot, and I made quite some waves about this because I believe this is highly unethical. NFR forms and DNR forms have their time and their place. If a patient and a family want this, right, and they think that it really is in their best interest, or if they have an advanced care plan, then this is what the patient and family wants, and that needs to be respected. But in this situation, this was a 41-year-old lady with a young family. Every day counted, right? And I think who knows me, I'm very direct. I call a spade a spade. I called them out at the ward round. It was they felt, I wouldn't say they felt embarrassed, but they felt like I was putting them on the spot, which I was, in front of the patient and the family. And it didn't go down well with them, with the ICU team. And I was part of the ICU team too, but I point out things where I think there is fit. And then the ICU nurse managers were trying to manage me, saying, well, how do you dare talk, calling out our doctors, and I did anyway. And nothing happened from there forward because they knew my stand and they knew I was right. I know the hospital policies, I know the local legislation, and I know about patients' rights. So there was nothing they could do besides being a little bit upset that I'm the one, standing up for patients. So that was then all changed and discussed with the family, and the NFR was revoked. Now, next example that I came across was in the very same ICU. There was a 22-year-old young fellow, a male patient that I looked after. He was in an MVA in a motor vehicle accident, and he had an acquired brain injury, and he was waking up very, very slowly. He still had a tracheostomy in place, and the nasogastric tube wasn't ventilated, but had a nasogastric tube in place, and was a very slow wake, from the brain injury, from the traumatic brain injury. So I think I did say ABI, acquired brain injury. It came from a traumatic brain injury from an accident. He was actually an overseas visitor on a tourist visa to Australia. But cutting a long story short, he had a DNR and his family hadn't even seen him, right? I can't remember where his country of origin was, but he came from Singapore or from Hong Kong or somewhere in Southeast Asia, and the family hadn't even seen him, and he was 22, right? And he had been issued with a DNR, and again, they couldn't talk to the patient because he was still in with a brain in ICU with a brain injury. And they couldn't talk to the family because the family was still overseas. So again, I found that highly unethical. I called everyone out on it, and I said, look, this is completely inappropriate. How do you dare making decisions over a patient's head that are potentially life or death decisions? Why would you not resuscitate a 22-year-old man who has a life ahead of him? It may or may not be with a brain injury. He may or may not recover. It wasn't enough time to suggest whether this gentleman will recover or won't recover. One of the things that I realized when I challenged the ICU team there and then was that some people within the ICU team, mainly senior doctors, were telling me that they have got a master's in ethics. And I said to them, well, I don't really care what masters you've got. Your decisions are unethical, right? And whether you've studied 5 years ethics or 3 years ethics, you don't need to study ethics to know what's ethical or moral and what's not, right? I mean, I don't know, anyone watching this now, if you have any comments there, would welcome any insights or any thoughts from you. But for me, it was a kick in my guts, and my gut was telling me, well, it's highly unethical to make such decisions without talking to patients' families, and with ignoring hospital policies and with ignoring local state laws, that this is illegal, right? So then, and those situations, from memory, they did not go to an ethics committee. They were just made on a local ICU level. They weren't even decisions that went to an ethics committee. However, with my experience later on, especially with intensive care hotline, it probably the ethics committee would have probably made the same decision, right? Which is why I have been saying on other blog posts and podcasts that, I do believe ethics committee in ICU or in hospitals are death committees. And again, I will talk more about that, and I will not mince my words here, because that's what I really think about ethics committees from what I've seen. So, for example, last year I was in a meeting with an ethics committee in ICU with a client, and in the US, and they had their 91-year-old mother in ICU after a pneumonia, and she was on a ventilator, on a breathing tube, and the hospital wanted to push a tracheostomy and wanted to send her out to LTAC, and the family objected. After we interjected, after they asked us for advice, and we said, well, no way should this lady go to LTAC. If a tracheostomy can be avoided, they should be working towards extubation and not working towards LTAC. They've written her off because of her age, but the client clearly confirmed that, his mother wanted to live, and she was pretty good at home. She just had a pneumonia. She's 91. Anyway, cutting a long story short, we looked at the medical records, we talked to the doctors and nurses, and we asked them to move towards extubation, work towards extubation, rather than pushing a tracheostomy and then sending her off to LTAC. The ethics committee decided, that a tracheostomy would be, quote unquote, in her best interest, or if that wasn't the case, then they should do a one-way extubation and let her die, right? And that's why I call an ethics committee, or ethics committees in ICU, often death committees. Now, here is another important thing about ethics committees in ICU or in hospitals in general. Usually, they're all hospital employees, i.e., because they're hospital employees, there is a conflict of interest, right? An ethics committee should be happening with outsiders and not with hospital employees. Clearly, there's a conflict of interest, right? So they want their ICU bed in this situation, in this example, they wanted to empty the ICU bed either by doing a tracheostomy, sending this lady off to LTAC, let her wither away there, or do a one-way extubation before she was ready and let her die that way. Anyway, I can assure you this lady lived at least for another year, and she actually lived at home after we successfully intervened and got her to an extubation, and she went home eventually. So that's why I say that ethics committees are, in my view, death committees. And I have other examples in a minute. I just want to go to Carly Corner questions. I hope I pronounce your name correctly there, Carly. My 21-year-old daughter was roofied after her college graduation when she went out with friends dancing. She was 1 out of 4 people poisoned and first to ER, but only one that didn't make it out. Oh my goodness. They tried to pull the plug on her less than 24 hours later because she went 5 minutes without oxygen, and they said her prognosis was grave. I said no, and they told me they didn't need my permission because she was already 21, and I would have to have a court order of conservatorship. Okay, so it sounds like you've been cornered there. She was 1 out of 4 poisoned first to ER, but only one that didn't make it out. So, Carly, are you suggesting here that your daughter has passed away? Is that what I'm reading here? I'm devastated to read that. Now, here is the thing. While I'm waiting for you to answer me whether your daughter has passed away or not, Carly, here's what I know about, you are referring here to conservatorship. I refer to that as, healthcare proxy or medical power of attorney. Many patients that go into ICU don't have a healthcare proxy or don't have when it comes to power of attorney, medical power of attorney, or healthcare proxy, it's usually no big deal putting that in place very quickly. Now, what I will say, if there are issues around that, I would strongly recommend, and this is for anyone listening to this, I would strongly recommend that you talk to a family lawyer to get this in place as quickly as possible. But even with your daughter being 21, I have not seen that you have to do a big deal of paperwork, because someone has to step in a situation like that. I think another thing that's important to know here, Carly, is I'm certain that while your daughter was in ER, that they would have asked you to give consent to certain procedures. Maybe they've asked you whether it's okay for them to intubate her. Maybe they've asked you whether it's okay to do a central line. They might have asked you whether it's okay to do an X-ray, whatever they've asked you consent for. So if they've asked you consent for certain procedures, and you might have even signed off consent for certain procedures, why would you then not need to give consent to potentially withdraw life support? You are saying, I fought back by not letting them bully me. She's in a vegetative state. I asked to have her home on hospice just to get her home. Right. Okay. So they didn't ask me anything. I live in Oregon. She was in California. Well, I can assure you that in California, the healthcare proxy or medical power of attorney needs to give consent. Any of you watching this that have watched any of my videos, I'll probably repeat myself when I'm saying this here now, but I think it can't be repeated often enough. ICUs are very good at pretending, or ER as well, are very good at pretending that end of life happens in a vacuum. Well, end of life decisions do not happen in a vacuum. So I'll give you an example. If you had called me, in this situation, then I would have gone back to them and I would have said to them, well, you let this lady go. That is murder, right? Or euthanasia, depending on what exactly happened clinically. Now, every time we do that, they back off, right? End of life decision making does not happen in a vacuum. It happens around policies, procedures, laws, right? Letting someone go in ICU and not saving their life without your consent, that is murder. So you got to her in 10 hours, they didn't do life-saving treatment. Right, okay. Right. Look, I can only talk from experience here. There is not one client that we worked with, not one, that we couldn't successfully intervene in a situation like that. Or you have her now on home care, no hospice, so your daughter is alive. Okay. That's excellent. That's excellent. Okay. That's excellent. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Okay, that's excellent to hear that at least she's at home. So is this a recent thing, Carly? Is this has this happened just recently, or is this months, weeks, years ago? All right. Well, it's been 2 years. I see. Wow. So you think that your daughter might be in that vegetative state because they didn't do everything within their power within the first 24 hours of ED? Do you think that might be the case? 2 years in August, right? Do you think that your daughter might be in the vegetative state because they didn't do best care, didn't give her best care and treatment to in the first 24 hours in ER? They didn't Narcan her because they were waiting on lab results, they said. Well, you give Narcan, generally speaking, if someone has an opiate overdose or if someone is potentially taking, drugs, illegal drugs. So, right. So, I would need to know more what exactly happened, why they didn't give Narcan. Difficult to say why, they said she went into respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest. Sure. Okay. All right. Carly, let me move along. Maybe you can keep commenting. The other three were Narcan, so they must have taken some drugs or right. Look, I would need to look at medical records to find out whether there's been negligence. Would be difficult for me to say from here what's exactly happened. Would be speculation. Anyway, look, keep the comments coming there. Let's just keep going on about, the ethics committees in intensive care and why they get it wrong most of the time. So we were working with another client earlier in the year around Christmas, New Year time in December, January, that had their, I think, 72-year-old dad in ICU for prolonged periods with end-stage cancer. But, the family, from a spiritual, moral, ethical, religious point of view, wanted to have everything done right until the end. And they wanted to have everything done right until the end. And the family felt like their dad wasn't getting best care and treatment right until the end in a particular ICU they were in. It was a very rural area, bit remote, very small ICU, didn't seem to have the resources. They couldn't do dialysis, for example. So he ended up going to Metropolitan ICU closer to, it was in Los Angeles at the time, and then, continue treatment there. But the ICU team again was very quick to say, well, this is futile treatment. ICU sometimes use the word futility or futile treatment. What is futile treatment? The definition of that is treatment that is of no perceived benefit. But again, I would highlight here, no perceived benefit. So it is a perception, maybe similar to your situation here, Carly. Maybe they didn't see that treatment for your daughter was of any perceived benefit. But again, I could not say here whether it was beneficial or not. You again, maybe you can send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com and send me more information. Maybe we can look at the medical records. I'll just send you my email address here, where you could email more information if you wanted to, so we can look at medical records and help you find closure there, especially if your daughter is still alive. Could you get some compensation for medical negligence? That is definitely a question worthwhile asking for you. So coming back to ethics committees in hospitals in ICU, again, for this one particular client that we worked with earlier in the year, again, they didn't want to continue treatment. The family felt very strongly about continuing treatment right until the end because they felt it was their moral, ethical, religious, spiritual, and cultural obligation. They felt like this is what their dad would want. And it then went to the ethics committee. And the ethics committee was actually quite blunt at the time, saying, well, we need the ICU bed. for other patients. We're very blunt about that, which is what I've been saying on my podcasts and my videos for the longest, that a lot of decisions in ICU are not based on prognosis or diagnosis. They are based on bed status and financial management. It's not in the best interest of a patient. It's what's in the best interest of an ICU, which is bed and finance and resource and staff management. And this particular ethics committee at the time was more or less admitting to that, saying, we feel like it's unethical if we don't free up this ICU bed to make room for another patient. So those are the realities that ICUs are dealing with. And you got to be very mindful of that these are the forces at play. Anyway, in this particular situation with our client earlier in the year, the client passed away eventually in ICU, even though he was on dialysis that the hospital no longer wanted to provide. It was a real end-of-life situation. The client was definitely dying. But again, it also comes down to that families want to have a say what an end-of-life situation looks like. I do believe that families in intensive care can accept what's happening as long as they see that everything is done within their power. That they do everything within their power, that they offer all benefits, all treatments. And if then it still doesn't work, then I think that families can make peace with end of life, as long as they see that ICUs are doing everything they can within their power. But one of the reasons, families reach out to us is they see that ICUs often don't try everything within their power, and they, are very negative, and they say, well, this person won't have any quality of life anyway, and therefore we should stop treatment. Now, here is another aspect of ethics committees that I haven't mentioned yet. I did mention to you in the beginning that we are running an organization, Intensive Care at Home. And with Intensive Care at Home, we are looking after predominantly long-term intensive care patients, and we're predominantly providing home care to patients on ventilators, tracheostomy, that otherwise would be in intensive care long-term. And all of our clients and their families, they want to live. So many of those clients for intensive care at home, many of our clients, if it was up to ethics committees, they would have said, well, their lives are not worth living, right? And breaks my heart that some people would even think that, because ask our clients, ask our families what they think about what is quality of life. Get it from people who live it on a day-by-day basis. Get it from the people who have been walking in those shoes and have taken the alternative and go home with intensive care nurses 24 hours a day to provide quality of life at home, instead of being long-term in an ICU, or even worse, having life support withdrawn and having no options to live. And a lot of ethics committees still need to learn about alternatives such as intensive care at home, so that people actually can have quality of life at home. So there are many other situations where the ethics committee, I believe, has turned out to be a quote unquote death committee. There was a client we worked with maybe 18 months, 2 years ago. She was a 46-year-old lady. She was in ICU with COVID. Also had an underlying condition of lupus. The ICU was telling her, was telling the family at the time, she will never come off the ventilator. She had a ventilator with a breathing tube initially. Again, they wanted to do a one-way extubation and lead her towards end of life. They did not share with the family that a tracheostomy would even be an option. They said, oh no, she won't survive anyway. Family reached out to us. We said to them, look, we can talk to the ICU team and make sure they need to educate you on the option of a tracheostomy. We did speak to the ICU team. The lady, again, 46-year-old lady, ended up with a tracheostomy, survived ICU, went home on BiPAP. I'm still in contact with this lady, and she's at home on BiPAP now. She's 46. She's got her first grandson, and she's extremely grateful that she is still alive. Now, does she have the same quality of life than she had before she went into ICU? No, she doesn't. Is she grateful to be alive? Absolutely yes. Right? Absolutely yes. Another example that I can give you is I recorded a podcast maybe 4 weeks ago. It's on our website now, with a gentleman, a 58-year-old gentleman who was in ICU again last year, fell off a roof, fell off a scaffolding in a workplace injury, fell head forward, ended up with a massive traumatic brain injury, had a cardiac arrest, ended up in ICU, was extremely unwell, had EVD drain, ICP monitoring, was on multiple inotropes, had massive seizures as part of the traumatic brain injury, was looking very grave. ICU told the family that the only option here is to withdraw treatment, and that it's actually, quote unquote, in the best interest of this gentleman. It turned out that, again, family reached out to us. We said, well, what about a tracheostomy here? And buying some time, again, the ICU did not educate the family about the option of a tracheostomy, right? So once we actually talked to the ICU at the time, we educated the family around it. The patient had a tracheostomy, survived the ICU stay, and was able, like 15 months later, to come on a podcast with me and his family and tell his story. So you can actually see what's happened to a patient that, where the ICU said, well, this patient won't survive. If he will survive, he won't have any quality of life, right? So it's actually unbelievable how wrong ICUs get it many times, right? And this particular family at the time would have also been prepared to take this man home with intensive care at home, right? So I will post a link to this particular podcast in here, so that you can watch the podcast and get a real life example. Now, two things with ethics committees before I wrap up today's topic and then answer some questions that we got through the week. Two comments that I would like to make here. So how should ethics committees happen in ICU? Well, I think if they should happen, then it should, that the people on the ethics committee should be outsiders. They should also be a mixture of doctors, nurses, but also members of the community, because clearly what patients and families see as ethical is often very different to what doctors and nurses might see as ethical in a hospital, bearing in mind their hospital employees. So the people on the ethics committee can't be hospital employees. That is definitely a conflict of interest. I might have just dropped out here for a moment because I just want to get this link for the podcast. So go and have a look. Here is the link to the podcast. It should come in a moment. Apologies. Here is the link to the podcast. Okay, so ethics committees, there's really no need for them to begin with. If there is a need for them for whatever reason, it should not comprise of hospital employees. It should comprise of doctors, nurses from external organizations or independent practitioners, and it should also include members of the community, maybe members of religious organizations, spiritual organizations. That would be my suggestion going forward. with ethics committees. Okay, then let's go to some questions that came in during the week that I will go through now. But in the meantime, feel free to ask your questions. You can also call in live on the show if you like. I'll quickly type in. We've got another 20 minutes. If you are in the US, you can dial in 415-915-0090. That is US, Canada. You can dial in live on the show. You can dial 041 094 2230 if you're in Australia. And you can dial 0118 324 3018 if you're in the UK or Ireland. So feel free to dial in live on the show with your questions. If you don't want to dial in, then I'll go through some questions that came in during the week. So, first question that I am going to answer today is from Nikki. And Nikki writes in, "Hi Patrick, my son, he's 20, he's minimally conscious and on a ventilator, he's at home. His respiratory company has minimal engagement, mostly to change ventilators. We are in Colorado in the US. I was wondering if your company offers any support for the weaning process at home. Thank you," from Nikki. Okay, well, that sounds like your son is in very much danger here. It doesn't sound to me like you have intensive care nurses 24 hours a day, which is what is absolutely necessary for someone on a ventilator at home. If you look at our website, intensivecarehome.com, and you check on the mechanical home ventilation guidelines, which are evidence-based, then anyone at home on a ventilator, in order to be able to leave intensive care, needs to have intensive care nurses with a minimum of 2 years intensive care experience, of 2 years, 24 hours a day. Everything else is dangerous and not evidence-based. Can we do weaning with intensive care at home? Absolutely. We have done weaning at home with intensive care at home. So let me be clear here again. When someone is at home on a ventilator with a tracheostomy, when someone is at home on a ventilator via BiPAP, CPAP without a tracheostomy, when someone is at home with a tracheostomy without mechanical ventilation, they need to have critical care nurses 24 hours a day, as per best practice and evidence-based practice guidelines, which you can find on our website at intensivecareathome.com. Now, there's more to that. Some of you may know that I've worked with intensive care at home 25 years ago in Germany, where we were pioneers setting up intensive care at home successfully in Germany. We now set it up successfully here in Australia. Now, clearly there is 25 years of research and evidence out there that intensive care at home needs to be provided with critical care nurses only, right? So, to come back to your question, Nikki, we can help you wean at home. You should contact us on the number that I posted in here, 415-915-0090, to get some help. We can advise you to take the next steps to get nurses, to get funding, because it sounds like you're lacking. Now, unfortunately, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that people die if they don't have 24 hours intensive care nursing at home, if they're on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. We had clients here that were ventilated with a tracheostomy that were only funded for night shifts, and clients passed away during the day, just as we predicted at the time, right? So we're not making it up. And for anyone watching this, that might be an NDIS representative. We are still waiting for the NDIS to respond to our concern about those deaths. And the NDIS seems to be busy trying to sweep it under the carpet. this is serious business. If the NDIS was funding what they had to fund with the clinical evidence we provided, those deaths could have been prevented. So Nikki, I really hope that answers your questions. I'll answer your question, what to do next and how to get maximum and evidence-based care at home, right? So next question is coming from Carla. This is actually a comment from one of the videos. Carla says, thank you so much. Your videos have given me so much insights and hope. My daughter's father, who was my high school sweetheart and who I love very much, we spent every day together. He aspirated on Easter, causing an anoxic brain injury. I administered CPR as soon as I realized there was a problem. And out of the probably 15 to 20 times I've had to do CPR in my life, there's only been one who passed, and one, besides my daughter's father, that had brain damage that anyone found, at least. He was storming Thursday and Friday, a little fever in the last couple of days, and no response to nail, beds, etc. But last night, after changing propofol to Presidex and weaning the fentanyl, when I started talking to him, he started slightly moving his arms and fingers and mouth. Then, at one point, it looked like he was trying to cry. The mouth turned down, eyebrows furrowed, and nose got flared. I'm praying he's going to be okay. I recommend your help to his parents. Okay. Well, thank you, Carla, for sharing your daughter's father's situation with me. I presume that, he's very young. And, it shows that he's got signs of waking up here. Now, this week, I was actually talking to a client who was in a very similar situation. There was a gentleman, a 48-year-old gentleman, and I will come back, Carla, to your question, how this relates to you. But I do want to share what's happened this week. I spoke to a client this week who had their 48-year-old husband in ICU, again, after a traumatic brain injury with a subdural hematoma after a jet ski accident. He's been in ICU since mid-April, and he's got a tracheostomy now. He's got a PEG tube. He is just coming out of sedation in the last few days, and he had not shown any signs of waking up at the time of my call with our consulting and advocacy client. And they showed me the CT and the MRI scan report. And the CT and MRI scan report didn't look all that bad, given that it was a traumatic brain injury, but he had not woken up at this point. So when we looked through the notes on our call, I, said to them that they have reason to be cautiously optimistic. Now, bear in mind, I'm not a neurologist, but I have seen many CT and MRI scan reports over the years, and have also seen outcomes of patients that I had the opportunity to look at MRI and CT scan reports. And I suggested to the family that they have reason to be cautiously optimistic. So, and that their husband should now slowly also start to get mobilized, to stimulate him very gently. After traumatic brain injury, you've got to be cautious in, not overstimulate the patient, but you got to start stimulating them so you can gauge the response that's coming from the brain, Anyway, cutting a long story short, after about the next day, actually the very next day, I get an email from this client and says, hey, Patrick, just letting you know, my husband is waking up. He's squeezing my hands. He's opening eyes. He can appropriately nod yes or no. He can appropriately answer yes or no to simple questions. And just as I predicted, they had reason to be cautiously optimistic, and hopefully he can get off on a good recovery there. So Carla, coming back to your question about your daughter's father, again, you should be cautiously optimistic here that, now he starts to slightly move his arm and his fingers and his mouth, and he was trying to cry. That's probably a good thing that he can show some emotion. It's probably not a pleasant situation he's in, there's no question about that, but at least he can show some emotion. And you got to give this waking up process some time. It can often take weeks, can sometimes take days, it can sometimes take months, right? Okay, I think we have time for another question, unless there are any other questions coming in here. This is a question from Amy. Amy writes in, my brother was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. They found a mass on his voice box and his air supply got threatened. They did a tracheostomy, and today he found out from the doctor that the tracheostomy can't be reversed. Melena damaged cartilage in his voice box. Would you get a second opinion? Look, Amy, I would probably always get a second opinion if you are unsure. They found a mass on his voice box and his air supply got threatened. Yes, I can see why they would have needed to do a tracheostomy. I can see that. Today he found out from the doctor that the tracheostomy can't be reversed. Melena damaged cartilage in his voice box. Would you get a second opinion? Look, I would definitely get a second opinion. I just need to, Melena damaged cartilage. I actually need to look that up. I don't know what that means. But to answer your question, I would get a second opinion, 100%. Especially if someone is telling you, well, your tracheostomy will be for the rest of your life, you absolutely want to have a second opinion for that, because that could impact your life big time. Now, if the voice box is damaged, maybe a tracheostomy is the way forward with the speaking valve. I don't know. The Melena damaged cartilage doesn't show up on Google with anything medically, so I'm really not sure what you are referring to there, Amy. Doesn't show up as anything medical. But in any case, you should get a second opinion, 100%. 100%. Okay, so now, next question. And we can help you with the second opinion here, Amy. You can reach out to us and find out more about what it's about. Go to intensivecarehotline.com, send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com, or just call us on one of the numbers on the top of our website at intensivecarehotline.com. Next question from Sylvia. Can my elderly father, who's on a tracheostomy and ventilator, recover? My father has been sleeping for around a week and he's an old man, 93 years old. Now, Sylvia, remember earlier in this call, I said that last year we were dealing with a 91-year-old lady and we avoided the tracheostomy, right? I think your best bet is to look at intensive care at home, right? If he can't be weaned off the ventilator and the tracheostomy, you should be looking at intensive care at home. If he can be weaned off the ventilator and he still needs a tracheostomy, you should contact us as well at intensive care at home, and we can help you from there. Can he wake up? Absolutely. If he's not woken up for a week, it's nothing unusual. You remember a minute ago I just told you that, or I just shared here, that a 48-year-old man has been in a coma for weeks after traumatic brain injury. I think people in ICU get the timelines wrong. 3 days in ICU is not a long time. 3 weeks in ICU is often not a long time. 3 months in ICU is a long time, right? A month in ICU is a long time. But you also always have to look at the bigger scheme of things, You have to look at the bigger scheme of things. What is happening? What's the care of the goals of care for your father. Does he want end-of-life care, for example? Can he recover? How in shape was your dad before he ended up on a ventilator with a tracheostomy? You got to put things in perspective in situations like that. So I hope that helps. Definitely for your dad, you should come to intensive care at home and check it out, how we can help you there. Now, okay, so let's wrap this up for today. I will do another YouTube live next week, same time, 10:30 a.m. Sunday, Sydney, Melbourne time, which will be 8:30 p.m. on a Saturday night Eastern Standard Time in North America. It'll be 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time in North America next Saturday. And you'll see me again here. I haven't got next week's topic yet, but it'll be something intensive care or intensive care at home related. If you found today's video valuable, I would appreciate a like for the video. I would appreciate if you subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates for families in intensive care and intensive care at home. If you do have a loved one in intensive care and you need help, go to intensivecarehotline.com, call us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or simply send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com. If you have a loved one in intensive care and you're looking for intensive care at home, please go to intensivecareathome.com, call us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or send us an email to info@intensivecareathome.com. If you are an NDIS support coordinator and you're looking for a provider for ventilation, tracheostomy, BiPAP, CPAP, home TPN, IV fluids, you've come to the right place here. You can contact us at intensivecareathome.com as well. We can also help with the advocacy for the NDIS or for any other funding body for that matter for home care. We are very experienced in the advocacy process, so please contact us there as well. Please also have a look at our membership for families in intensive care and intensive care at home at intensivecaresupport.org. There you have access to me and my team 24 hours a day in the membership area and via email, and we answer all questions intensive care and intensive care at home related. Also, if you need an NDIS nursing assessment, please contact us as well. We provide NDIS nursing assessments, and we also provide medical record reviews in real time. We can give you that second opinion in real time. Please contact us as well. We also provide medical record reviews after intensive care if you have unanswered questions, if you need closure, or if you are suspecting medical negligence. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates for families in intensive care. Give the video a like, click the notification bell. Share the video with your friends and families and comment below what you want to see next or what questions and insights you have from this video. Thank you so much for watching. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home and Intensive Care Hotline, and I will talk to you next week and during the week. Take care.